My brother hired a private detective to prove I was the biggest failure in our family, and he successfully discovered my multi-million-dollar secret. So our family had to hold an emergency meeting during dinner. My two siblings and I grew up in this charming tiny town, and I am the middle sibling. Everyone there is acquainted with one another, which is sometimes an advantage and sometimes a drawback. My dad is the kind of man who works extremely hard all the time, but he's not the kind to talk about his feelings or anything. And now he's considering retiring and hanging up his boots. Conversely, my mother is the total opposite. She has always taken care of the house and has adhered to the traditional values that she was raised with. Both of them come from devout and conservative backgrounds. I cherish them. I mean, they're my parents. However, I've always felt that I fell short of their expectations. It hurts a little that they appear to view me as the family let down. My older brother is the next in line. He truly is the family's golden boy. He married a pretty but reserved woman at the age of 40, and he settled down. She seems to be very silent and lacks anything to say. Their two sons are passionate about sports, especially the kind where you could get a few bruises. They can be a bit of a handful and over the top, to be honest. Definitely not the quiet, collected ones. My brother works as a car salesman at a nearby dealership. He appears to believe that it is his responsibility to mentor me in doing what he has decided to do as an adult. However, it seems more like he regards me as like I'm something he can't handle by himself, as if I'm in continual need of assistance and ought to be incredibly appreciative of whatever attention he offers. He gives advice all the time, but it usually comes off as him bragging about how wonderful he thinks his life is. He enjoys taking pride in his large home, expensive vehicles, and trophy-like wife. He continues to construct a picture of this ideal existence, talking about his athletic children, his powerboat, and his ATVs. I feel like the odd one out even more because of that. I was the child in school who was too sensitive, often moved to tears, and always came up with reasons why things didn't work out for her. School was really difficult. I was not one of the tough, sporty people. I was not one of those huge, strong guys that like playing rough and tumble. Rather, I became the object of jokes and was never truly included in anything, which made me feel even more alienated. I get it completely. I have asthma much like a lot of other youngsters in my community. The really bad news is my folks don't think asthma is a serious medical condition. In addition, I have struggled with depression for as long as I can remember, and I was never the type of child who could throw a football straight or run down a field. This did not alleviate my parents' incessant comparative remarks. They would frequently comment on how I wasn't as intelligent or gregarious as my older brother. I had a difficult time and graduated from high school with a 2.5 GPA, which is mediocre. I started college after managing to build up some cash, but things didn't work out, and I left in my second year. This choice became a hot topic of discussion, not in a positive sense. Next is my younger sister. She was essentially the family's princess. And because I moved out when she was a teenager, I don't know much about her. My feelings for her are mostly based on my observations of her as an adult. She's only a little overindulged. She's not a nasty person at all. She often treats me the same way my brother and parents do, most likely because it's less difficult than being the intended victim. She married at the age of 19, had a lavish wedding, and currently has 3 children. Her middle child is the one with whom I identify the most. She's also the middle kid, so I suppose I see a little bit of myself in her because she is frequently teased, perhaps because her challenges are similar to mine. I feel as though I understand hers more. I truly started to embrace my nerdy, introverted side when I graduated from college. I was hired by a comic book and game store in my neighborhood, which I really enjoyed working at until it closed more than 7 years ago. My parents still discuss it like I work there now, in spite of that. But meeting another geek with big plans made my time there worthwhile. We co-founded a tech support company that prospered greatly. My business partner eventually made the decision to include the sale of our company to a bigger company in the agreement. Cash and stock options were used to buy me out, and the stocks turned out to be quite profitable. I made several wise investments, and even launched a couple additional side ventures, many of which were very successful. I try not to boast too much, but I have amassed assets that are valued at more than $1 million thus. I now lead a brand new private startup as its CTO. I'm financially successful, but I lead a quite modest life. I have been driving a 15-year-old Saturn. All of the furniture in my modest 2-bedroom home in a great neighborhood is secondhand. I'm not dating anyone right now. I visit my therapist on a regular basis and lead a busy life. Fighting alcoholism is one of my continuous struggles, which is difficult. Because similar to my melancholy and asthma, my parents don't think it's genuine. They believe it to be entirely mental. Despite the ups and downs in my life, I've been able to forge a successful route for myself, even if it's not what other people would anticipate or comprehend. Every Sunday night, my parents want me to be at their house for supper. But it's not just a brief journey since they reside on the opposite side of the state. It will take them 90 to 120 minutes to get there. Each trip that consumes almost half of my weekend. Nevertheless, they seem to believe that I wouldn't have anything better to do with my time if I were unmarried, and what my brother likes to call a mental case. These meals might be somewhat difficult. I sit there for 3 hours getting unsolicited advice on how to be a good adult, get married, and have a family. Or I listen to forced comments on my brother's most recent huge sale at the car dealership. I can always count on it to be the talk of the table the next time I miss one of these dinners. They've never called me a moocher explicitly, but the insinuation is there, which is annoying and puzzling. When I speak with my therapist, I must admit that I frequently wonder why I continue to attend these events. Up until lately, my family has either reduced or distorted every success I've had into something unpleasant. Back home, everyone still believed that I worked at the now-closed game store. My brother had a good career and was perceived as more mature and outgoing than me, so people constantly looked down on me for my previous retail work. Because of this difference, it was difficult for me to tell my family members back home about the real situation of my life and my accomplishments. Comics and games were usually dismissed as juvenile pastimes. I truly am an expert in technology, therefore I always try to bring it up. My brother used to talk over me acting as though I was ignorant. Usually, I just listened to him babble even though I could tell he was talking gibberish. I was afraid to correct him. I didn't want to have to defend my area of expertise, which would ultimately force me to elaborate on my work. I believe that deep down, I was afraid that they wouldn't respect my career and that it would cause them to view me differently overall. I'll admit that I've been a bit of a disaster. But last month, everything was different. My brother managed to obtain some of my personal data in some way. In reality, he engaged a private investigator to conduct what he purported to be a background investigation on my employment. I had a feeling that he was preparing an intervention with my parents. What they found totally caught them off guard. They discovered my true financial worth, that I wasn't residing in some dilapidated apartment, among other sensitive information. In particular, because security is a part of my job. After connecting the dots, I even received alerts about certain fraudulent efforts to obtain my credit report. I deduced the cause of the incident. Everything has come to light as a result of this revelation, and I now have to deal with my family's unanticipated change of opinion of me. It's a lot to take in, especially in light of the misconceptions and undervaluation that have pervaded my relationship with them for such a long time. My family's finances were investigated by the same private detective business because I was so incensed over the invasion of my privacy. My brother was, as it turned out, living much over his means. Investigation results included calls for domestic disturbances, a file with Child Protective Services, and multiple prior arrests for DWI and public intoxication. He was juggling 3 mortgage loans on his home and was having trouble making his scheduled IRS back payments, even though there were no active charges at the moment. His credit was a complete mess. My parents, on the other hand, had simple lives and had very little possessions, other than what I already knew sensible and realistic about money. I didn't even bother to see how my sister was doing. I was prepared to face them and possibly cause a rift when I showed up at the next family meal. But the mood I entered was very different from what I'd envisioned. My parents started to treat me like the golden kid, with an odd kind of veneration. My brother was clearly bothered by this change. Dinner was halfway done when he lost his cool. He began bragging about recent sales commissions and a purported promotion in an effort to retake some ground. I only thank him for these accomplishments, while gently bringing up his debt IRS issues and stretched credit status. In other words, I celebrate his successes while drawing attention to the truth of his financial catastrophe. It was all really strangely depressing. My parents' abrupt shift in conduct toward me felt forced and fake, which made the already difficult family dynamic much more uncomfortable. When I showed him a copy of the report, he initially disputed everything, but I pointed him that it was him who had unintentionally recommended the agency by employing it to look into me. There was a moment, I have to admit, when that felt good. My parents were obviously in on it too, as they responded with dramatic astonishment and reprimanded him. My social security number was required in order for him to obtain the report. The entire scene was quite unnerving. Neither the revelation nor the argument that followed were enjoyable. My contempt for my family was solidified as it brought to light their cowardice and greed. They began putting each other under the bus throughout the course of the following hour, accusing each other, and I made an effort to keep silent. Every now and then they directed their annoyance at me, and I would shrug or give a casual one-word response. My brother's wife, my sister's husband, and the 5 children watched in disbelief as a family fell apart like never before. Our get-togethers are usually unremarkable and predictable. My mom would strike up a discussion. My dad would grumble in response. My sister would provide updates whenever she could, and my brother and his wife would brag about their lives. There had never been a breakdown like this at our family feasts. The family dinner was turbulent, to put it mildly, with the customary, subtly pointed jabs about how I should look up to my brother and be a real man. Leaving everyone at the table in stunned silence as they struggled with the sudden exposure of deep-seated issues that had long been simmering beneath the surface of our familial relations. My brother, Dad, and I got into a boisterous argument over the conversation. They dug up every scrap of old family turmoil from 3 decades ago and argued over who was to blame for everything. It was similar to witnessing the events unfold in real time, completely free for anybody. In those moments, every bad thought I had about my family seemed to be confirmed. You would think that I would feel some sort of victory for justice, but in all honesty, I felt awful. I came to the realization that I might not have handled things well. I knew they were bad people, but frankly, what was I hoping to achieve by making my brother's transgressions public? I had not intended for his kids to know about his history, but now they did. When my brother Red became enraged and yelled at me, the night came to a head. He accused me of being the cause of all the family's issues, saying harsh things like, "You should have never been born." Not only were his remarks startling at the time, but I also saw my parents attempt in a frenzy I had never seen before to calm him down. They tried to step in, but they never really took responsibility for the way they had treated me over the years. I felt both vindication and intense sadness at the same time, because it was a clear and painful reminder of the serious problems in our family dynamics. I got up and said I was done with these dinners, and that I wouldn't be returning when I could take it no more. At that point, my parents made another accusation against me. They said that I was refusing to assist a niece or nephew who was ill, implying that I had the ability to heal them, but chose to ignore them. I was unaware of this. No one has ever contacted me for assistance or informed me of any such problem. I didn't question it, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they were making it up as they went along. Rather, I reminded them, I believed you thought so. I continued to work at a comic book shop. I'd emphasized several times that the place had closed down in 2011, but they never seemed to realize how disgusting and disgraceful the way they had altered our family history was. Feeling overwhelmed and irritated, I simply left and took a car home. I'm left feeling conflicted right now. I feel betrayed that they are aware of my wealth. And I know that this will put pressure on me to repay them, particularly because I've witnessed them treat my brother in the same way. However, I do recognize and value the fact that my parents met my fundamental necessities as a child, food, drink, and shelter. I'll have to tread cautiously through this complicated maze of thankfulness, resentment, and newly established limits, especially since they now have expectations based on my financial success. I'll probably need some time to process this dynamic shift, maybe with the assistance of my therapist. It's obvious that going forward, establishing strict boundaries will be essential. To be honest, I wasn't my family's favorite child. That's why growing up was difficult. even if my parents never physically abused me. When my brother mistreated me, they did little to stop him when he used to hit, kick, and say incredibly nasty things to me. My parents would just act like nothing was wrong and ignore it. They don't even think that verbal abuse is acceptable. What I'm trying to say is that while verbal abuse is awful in and of itself, it hurt a lot. After spending so much time battling this, there's a limit to what I can handle at this time. Even though I know they are my family, I feel is like I must permanently distance myself from them. I wish them nothing but the best. I simply believe that moving on and starting a new chapter on my own will benefit me more than staying around them. I wonder what would happen if I find a particular someone like a girlfriend, and we decide to be married and start a family in the future. Then how will I address matters with my family? I'm attempting to understand it, because it has the potential to become quite complex. If I'm not actually talking to my old family anymore, how do I introduce my new family to them? I have a lot of questions about that. Before you read the update, let me offer a comment. Proceed, not in contact. They only wanted you around to make themselves feel better, which is why they only wanted you around in the first place. Now they just want you around so they can take part of your money. Your family does not represent who you are. I mean, they're all bad. You're not a failure. In fact, you seem like a really nice guy who was treated unfairly in your familial situation. Turn off their phone and go on with your life. I believe you performed a fantastic job. Cut back on your family's contact as much as you'd like. You are aware that all they want is your money. Therefore, you are free to interact with them only on your own terms to help you transition into a life without them holding you back. Keep in contact with your therapist. Avoid making touch. Indeed, if you're able to move to a different city and pack your belongings in order to start again, a lot of people are at odds with their families when it comes to dating. You're not alone in having to make such severe decisions. It can be awkward to explain this to a prospective partner, particularly if they have close family ties. When the moment is appropriate, you will start a new family. There are a few things I believe you should do in the interim. Place a security freeze on your credit accounts, if you haven't already. You might want to think about alerting them if your brother obtained this information about you using resources from the vehicle dealership. If they found out they were involved in fraud, I doubt they would be happy about it. Get a lawyer as well. Even though you're young, tragedies do happen and your parents are currently the default next of kin and will receive everything. Go to someone else if you would rather view your assets even if you don't care about it. Put it in writing as quickly as you can. Lastly, locate a reputable counselor in the upcoming months. You might go through some grief. It will be beneficial to discuss it with a specialist after that huge dinnertime showdown. Update. Dude. Returning home by car seemed like leaving a war zone. Only my thoughts and I were zipping through the night on the peaceful road. As soon as I came into my driveway, I realized that something needed to shift. I had to stop hosting these dinners for the family, not unless I lose my mind. I remained to myself during the next 2 weeks, concentrating on my career and mental health. The technology devices and comics I had lying about my house weren't merely eye candy. They served as my haven in order to figure out how to distance myself from my family without alienating them entirely. I intensified my therapy sessions. Dr. Bennett, my therapist, was invaluable in helping me establish boundaries. He guided me through techniques that were more akin to creating a fort than erecting a wall. As the temperature increased, my thoughts began to stray into the future, namely in regards to relationships. After spending some time alone myself and being single, I began to feel as though meeting someone wonderful was not only feasible, but also likely, and then ever appeared in my life straight out of a comic book. At a tech conference we got together, I became engrossed in her lecture about cybersecurity, not only by the subject, but also due to her charm. She understood me was intelligent and grounded. She also had a love-centered perspective on families, but with steely limits. The unspoken issue in Ava's situation became more serious, was how to introduce her to my family's circus. We talked about how to manage it over pizza on many an evening. We decided to keep family get-togethers informal, visible, and brief. Was even willing to support me, which changed everything. Our first events were coffee dates. It was with either that I reintroduced myself to the family get-togethers. The first few times were really awkward, as one could expect. My parents were extremely courteous, cautious around me, as if I could suddenly go away. My brother, on the other hand, seemed to be trying to say a million things, but was having trouble finding the right words. However, my sister and her children were a welcome change of pace, either immediately won over her middle child, who was so much like me. We started to get into these coffee dates. They resembled quick trips into family territory, swift entry and exit. I was able to reconnect without being sucked into the turmoil. Surprisingly, it began to function. My family adapted to this new arrangement gradually, maybe recognizing that this was the only option to maintain me in their lives. They started to respect my boundaries. Even as I got nearer, I began to consider the long term more. How might our future appear? I saw us creating something strong, a loving and respectful family foundation, not duty and shame. But I was aware that there would be challenges along the way. Eva and I were strolling by the lake one summer evening when we discussed the possibility of moving in together. I became aware of how far I had gone from feeling abandoned by my family to being able to stand on my own with a true understanding of myself. It seemed to be day and night. I'm cautiously enthusiastic about the future. I'm aware that the journey ahead will be rocky. Heck, crater-sized potholes might exist, but I think I'm ready with Eva. It was more than simply self-preservation that drove me to set those boundaries with my family. It was about creating space for new friendships and a happy future for me. Regarding the Sunday dinners, they remain scheduled, but now they are at my convenience. I go occasionally, and sometimes I don't. When I do, I take Eva with me, and we tackle whatever comes up together. Although it's far improved, it's still not flawless. It's about striking that balance. Maintaining harmony without becoming overwhelmed by it. Second tale. Hello to all of you. Please be gentle with me. I'm still learning how to share anything online. There's a lot going on in my life right now, so I want to share everything with you. First, let's talk about the principal players. I'm over there, Daisy, my soon-to-be ex-wife Mario, our son, and Peach, our daughter. We are currently experiencing a difficult separation that is rapidly developing into an extremely harsh divorce. This is the tale then. Daisy and I are leaving together, primarily because she came to terms with her bisexuality early this year. She told me outright that she wanted our marriage to be open. That thought didn't sit well with me at all. When I discovered Daisy had slept with my coworker, who also happens to be one of my best friends, the issue became even more confusing. You can imagine how awkward and painful that was. I'm a police officer. It seemed like a betrayal from both the workplace and the home. We were unable to be together after that, so I took some time off to clear my thoughts. Daisy made a great effort to keep us together. At first, things took a terrible turn when it became apparent that I was adamant about not expanding our marriage despite her pleas and arguments to the contrary. Daisy's perspective entirely shifted. Things became pretty bad when she started acting spiteful. The last thing I wanted was for her to start treating our children like pawns in this whole situation. Daisy began telling Peach that I no longer loved them, which was why she had to leave our house, that I loathed them and was severing our family. Hearing that was devastating, especially in light of how perplexed and depressed Peach must be feeling. Daisy currently resides at her mother's house, where our children often pay her visits. Daisy and her new companion attempt to make everything look like a huge, exciting vacation throughout these trips. They lavished Peach and Mario with toys and candy, presumably in an attempt to play the cool parents and turn them against me. In addition to the emotional turmoil, Daisy is disagreeing with me on every single sensible matter. We are at odds about everything: how much money one of us should be making to support the other, and who should inherit what possessions. What was the most difficult part? How are we going to divide up our time between Mario and Peach? Every agreement we attempt to establish is met with resistance from her, and it seems as though she is only making things more difficult for herself. Daisy, my soon-to-be ex-wife, has been adding to the complexity lately. It's unfair that she has been telling our children things that paint me as the villain. Peach and Mario, for instance, have been inquiring as to whether or not I dislike Daisy's new companion. For whatever reason, it appears that AP loves them more than I do. Let's call them AP. Their minds are seriously disturbed by this kind of conversation. I was working on something major at work a few weeks ago. I was attempting to get promoted from police officer to homicide detective, which takes a lot more overtime. Daisy and I therefore decided that the children would stay with her during this hectic period, and on the weekends, when it was time for them to head to Daisy's, I would drop by as I gave Mario the bag. I packed a large one for him. "Are you taking us away because you hate us?" he said, tears welling up in his eyes as he gazed at me. "Like your mother says it was a heartbreaking time." I gave him a big hug and told him it wasn't true. I really did love him. I went to see them last weekend, and even though I tried, it was still weird. It was quite difficult. They didn't say much to me. It stung a lot that it felt like they didn't even want to see me. I couldn't have another chance to speak with them until today. They both looked so dejected as I scooped them up. I was able to speak with them, and it was evident that Peach in particular is struggling. Daisy seems to be making it difficult for her to express her love for me, even if she still does. I'm attempting to determine the best course of action to do in order to minimize the harm to the children, because it's a challenging scenario when things in a family get twisted like way. It can be difficult. She is struggling a lot because she feels like she can't love me. I can no longer stand by and watch while my princess suffers. I'm starting to doubt this divorce because it's actively hurting them. Should I pursue the divorce further? Is there a way to go forward while protecting my children? Shall I just accept it and stay? The comment will now be made. You must immediately disclose all of information to your divorce lawyer. This is parental alienation, and although it will probably be difficult to enforce, a judge will probably order that it stop. Thus, you must act immediately and continue acting upon this. Daisy is an extremely evil individual. Make sure to record everything and get a divorce from her. It won't get any better. Things will only get worse if you stay. This is parental alienation, dude, and it's a major factor in why my friend was granted custody of his child, since this was what his ex-wife was doing. Quickly get an attorney involved and document this and treatment for the children. What a terrible person your ex is. Don't give her your children anymore. Inform your attorney of her actions and that your children are not spending time with their mother unsupervised. In addition, I would inform CPS about your ex's treatment of your children by calling them for the love of your children. This is a never return the favor to her. Story 2, hello, I'm Caitlin. I was signed up to sing by my sister, to make fun of me not out of affection. It's a harmless prank, she said. I told everyone that I had given up. However, I didn't. There I stood. Mike, dead. The crowd chuckled. Every phone had a video making fun of me. I continued to sing. She believed she was making me fail. She constructed me a stage without realizing it. Prior to starting, have you ever been the target of someone's jokes and used it to your advantage? Leave a comment. I'm paying attention. The instant I entered Green Hollow Middle School through its double doors, I could sense the cold. Not because of the weather, but because every time I walked into the hallway, it appeared to get smaller. I hugged the strap of my bag a bit more tightly than normal, keeping my eyes downcast. Scuffed yet familiar were the linoleum tiles. The pupils never gave me the same look in return. The others had discovered something to talk about. The bright, cringing posters were up. Lee was happy and pasted on all the walls. Sign up by Friday for the year-end talent showcase. As if we were on Broadway rather than cooped up in a gym with smashed folding chairs. Someone had even put a star over the word showcase. I didn't give it much thought. Why would I? I hadn't made any commitments. So, when a girl I hardly knew walked by and mumbled with a sideways smirk, it stopped me cold. Cave girl, I can't wait to witness your big moment. I blinked. Cave girl. The sign-up form had been tacked to the auditorium board, and I followed the faint murmur of voices toward it. As they laughed and nudged one another, the students leaned forward. I took the lead when the group moved. It was there. Caitlin Godsey closing act solo singing performance. For the following several seconds, I couldn't even remember breathing. It seemed like if my stomach had fallen 2 levels below me. Behind me, other kids snorted. Then Callista appeared slouching nonchalantly against the wall. With 2 of her glittery buddies on either side of her, she had her arms crossed. She gave me a sweet, even sympathetic smile while looking me in the eye. You're really welcome. she said. Isn't everyone entitled to their moment? I could detect the sarcasm behind the sugary tone of her voice. She didn't have to push anyone or roll her eyes. Her smile did the talking. My fingers were twitching at my sides as I stood still. I briefly considered picking up a pen and marking my name off the list. However, I remained still. Someone muttered behind me as she eventually crawled out of her cave, her laughter barely audible enough to stab me in the back like a sharp thumbtack. Before my face betrayed me, I turned aside. I managed to go through the remainder of the afternoon without saying more than a few words. I remained inside. Keep quiet. Be cautious. Viewing at home. When I entered, the table was already set. Mom was dishing green beans that were overdone. Callista had come in earlier, looking radiant after her post-practice shower. Hello. She related a humorous event that happened at school. Something about a teacher getting exploded by a beverage. Mom chuckled as if that were the most delightful thing she had heard in a month. At the end of the table was where I sat. Nobody ever inquired about my day, and I kept the list a secret from them. Nobody would have paid attention long enough to notice. The sound of Callista's voice reverberated throughout the kitchen. Her campaign for prom committee, her team-winning regionals, and her flawless GPA. Mom didn't even glance at me when she poured her glass again. Dad hadn't been around for a long time. The one thing in this house that everyone respectfully disregarded was his absence, similar to the fissure that runs down the wall of the living room. Callista withdrew to her room after supper, and I quietly filled the dishwasher. Mom went to grade papers. I went up the steps. For a girl who hadn't spoken at dinner, her heart was racing more than it should have. The light in my bedroom was dim. The sheets wrinkled a little. I had left my notebook open to a blank page on the desk. I took a seat, grabbed my pen, and started writing. She did it to make me look foolish. I gazed for a while at the words. Not because I didn't think they were real. Yes, I did. I simply had no idea what would happen next. I refrained from crying. I didn't get angry. With my hands clasped on my stomach, my eyes focused on the ceiling, and a fan spinning silently above, I closed the notebook and reclined. Everything in this house seemed to be spinning all the time. Talks, pay attention, love. However, I never experienced any of it. I never wanted to be on a stage, and now I was going to be the last act. Everyone somehow expected me to fall even though I didn't sign up to sing. When I arrived at school 15 minutes earlier than usual the following morning, that thought stayed with me. Most of the corridors were deserted. A handful of instructors were conversing by the faculty lounge. A few janitors were wrapping up, and the vending machine's buzz was resonating louder than normal. Perhaps they had removed the list, but that was all I was expecting for. Perhaps someone recognized it as an error or a practical joke. Perhaps it never took place after all. However, hope deflated as quickly than a kicked balloon as soon as I entered homeroom. The official program for the year-end display was neatly arranged on each desk. The event title and the school's emblem were printed in strong glossy writing on the front. Some of the covers had even been embellished using glitter markers. Silently, I slipped into my seat, prior to my obtaining a copy. In the rear is a girl, Taylor, always watchful, always loud. I opened one, looked at a page, and then grinned. Caitlin, you have courage. Comedy requires guts. It's comedy. Don't you know that I didn't respond? She flicked her fingers casually and threw the brochure onto my desk. My chest froze the moment I saw my name, or what was meant to be my name. Goofy Kaylee. Vocals by one person. Scavo. Just funny. No Godsey. Not even close. Scarborough is fair too. The title wasn't just misspelled. They twisted it into a poor joke. Someone had sketched a little comic beside the words, like I was a farm chicken with large googly eyes, and little music notes over its head was clutching a microphone. For laughter, animals stumble into the spotlight. Even the voices of those around me were inaudible to me. Everything but my heartbeat seemed muffled, like if someone had turned down the sound. Don't respond. Don't let them see how they affected you. I carefully and gently folded the paper. the way you fold a fragile object. I put it in my backpack's front pocket. No hurry, no flinch. Simply be tidy and slow. Our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Dunlap, came in carrying her coffee and gave me a quick look before turning to face the other students. She saw that I was holding the program. She saw the smiles. She remained silent. I believe Elijah, a youngster across the room, yelled out, "It's a little messed up." Mrs. Dunlap did not even raise her head. "It's only a joke," she remarked with a simple shrug. "Don't be overly serious about anything." That's when I knew it wasn't just a few students or Callista. I was viewed as a joke and throwaway even by grown-ups. The remainder of the day passed in a daze. Until I was called upon, I remained silent. I skipped lunch. The last bell rung, but I didn't look at my phone. The scent of damp pavement and spring pollen filled the air as I waited until the corridor was almost empty before going outdoors. In order to avoid bumping into anyone, I took the long route home, navigating the area behind the school. It was in disarray as I entered our living room. Callista was whirling in a sleek dress covered with sequins in the middle. Her pals threw compliments like confetti while lounging on the couch. "This is it." As she snapped a photo with her phone, one of them spoke. Completely amazing. I attempted to sneak by undetected, but as soon as I got to the stairs, I heard one of them murmur, "Hey, is that the program girl?" A high-pitched mocking voice added its voice. "Yes, viral chicken girl." Laughter. They were not stopped by Callista. She didn't stand up for me. She didn't even appear shocked. Rather, she spoke in that sing-song voice she employed when she wanted to come out as kind. "Even if she burns, perhaps this is her moment to shine." I continued. I didn't look around. I just ascended the steps, one step at a time. Every foot was heavier than the one before. The light was already dimming in my room. I didn't switch the lamp on. I took the software out of my rucksack and perched on the side of my bed. The page remained fluid. There are no tears or wrinkles around the bottom corner of the back. I scribbled 5 words in all uppercase using a black pen. "You were the first to light the match." I folded it one more. This time it's sharper. Not kind, not pliable. As though I were changing it into something else. Something hazardous. There's no denying it. It was no longer a funny paper. It was evidence. They laughed and I wasn't angry. I was furious. They thought I wouldn't. The following morning, I packed my lyric notebook first and got up before the alarm even sounded. I walked out of the home without even looking at my mirror. It had nothing to do with appearances. It had nothing to do with leaving an impression. I simply had to know. I had to see for myself whether my name still had any significance in that auditorium. Near the band room, the rehearsal schedule was taped to the door. I entered the school through the side door before the majority of the students had even arrived. The notebook ragged at the edges. Its pages softened from years of opening and closing was in my hand as the linoleum floors continued to reverberate with the sounds of early mopping. Prior to her death, it was the only item I ever inherited from my mother. I went to the board with cautious optimism, but even optimism now seemed like a betrayal of common sense. And there it was. The title had changed, but my name was still at the bottom. Callista, Shiloh, Brantley, and Eva are featured in the final quartet pop remix. One slow inch at a time, I stared at it with a sinking heart. No Scarborough Fair, not a single vocalist, not me. I felt a knot in my gut. With my sneakers squeaking quietly on the glossy wood, I entered the theater carefully. The stage manager was already inside flipping over documents on a clipboard as a few students engaged in light conversation. I went over after clearing my throat. "Pardon me," I replied softly, gesturing toward the board. "I believe there is an error. I never consented to switch tracks." She gave a shrug, scarcely raising her head. "You exchanged group numbers, they stated." "Close. More powerful, huh?" My throat choked on my voice. I was able to say, "I didn't change." After blinking, she gestured to the stage where Callista was laughing with Shiloh while resting on the piano and flicking her hair. "Perhaps ask your sister." The new music was brought by her. Suddenly, the discussion came to an end. I remained still. For a few seconds, no. I simply stood and gazed at the stage. The individuals who took something that was rightfully mine. and transformed it into something else, something flashier, louder, and more shiny. Callista looked at me from the other side of the room, but she continued to giggle. She did not wave, she didn't flinch. She simply cocked her head as if I weren't there. I didn't go up against her. I turned and walked away. The air seemed sharper now, the corridor colder. I continued going until I came to the practice field's rear bleachers. From there, I could still hear the music beginning inside, with voices layered over one other and the bass booming. The same tune. It's my song. Just now. There was no silence. It wasn't as delicate or eerie as I had thought. It was decked up with sparkly harmonies, reverberating claps and artificial rhythms. Last month, Brantley couldn't even sing in tune, but suddenly he was belting out my favorite line, my mom's favorite line, with a flamboyant flair. Now the words struck in a new way. Plastic. Made fun of. Rewritten. I tried to breathe through the pain that was developing behind my eyes by pressing my fingers to my temples. I refrained from crying. I was unable to. I might not be able to stop sobbing if I did. I opened the journal instead. As I turned to the next blank page, my fingers was trembling a little, as well as in the area underneath my most recent entry. I'll just talk loudly if they won't let me sing. It has a song-like tone. Not yet, it wasn't defiance. It wasn't capitulation, though. The fragrance of warmed food filled the house when I arrived. My dad wasn't present. Lately, he was seldom ever, always putting in extra hours at work or spending 2 hours acquiring petrol. Beside the stereo, my mom's old cassettes were still neatly arranged. I grabbed the one whose label was smeared. K Lullabies. Callista was FaceTiming someone in the living room discussing nail paint samples and how the glitter tone simply screams closing act enthusiasm, but I didn't eat supper or say anything to her. I closed the door to my bedroom. I wrote the lyrics weeks ago and taped them. My closet door's inside in its initial configuration. I then rewound the cassette, switched on the ancient stereo, and listened to my mother's voice hum over the static. On tape, she always sounded softer. I took a seat next to the door. I'm on my knees with my notepad open in my lap, and I whispered aloud to no one for the first time in days. I will continue to sing everything they do. It was mine, but it wasn't noisy. They didn't remove my voice, but they did take my solo. Not even 7:30 had arrived. The building still smelled of pencil shavings and worn carpet when I entered the music hallway the following morning. I passed the trophy case the row of sun-fading theatrical posters and came to a halt in front of the entrance of the choir chamber. Even though I hadn't intended to speak, I couldn't continue to be indifferent after what they did, and after hearing my comments turned into a glitzy joke. Mrs. Carver was already inside putting down her coffee and opening the practice chart for the morning. I stepped in, but she didn't look up. Before I spoke, I stood there for a few seconds. Mrs. Carver, I have a question. As if I had stopped an opera, she glanced over her spectacles. I tried not to let my throat wobble as I cleared it. I never registered for the year-end performance. My name was entered by someone else, and I then composed the song. I wasn't asked, and it was replaced. She sighed as she reached for her pen after blinking gently. Caitlin, it boosts self-esteem. That's the purpose of these things. You need to feel grateful that they even included you. I tucked my fingers into my hands. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper as I gave a sharp nod. All right, I muttered. I could tell by the tone of her voice that it wasn't okay, but it didn't matter. I took a step back toward the entrance and stopped. I want to practice another piece, I added, mine. Could I arrange a microphone time? Half a giggle escaped her as she exhaled. Sweetheart, you don't require a microphone. Behind me isn't Carnegie Hall. Some of the kids laughed. A child in the back squawked and mimed flapping wings as if holding a microphone. Goofy has pipes. He chuckled. I didn't look back. I simply left. My shoes' soles are a little stuck to the waxed floor. Like gum on the bottom of my shoe, the laughing followed me down the corridor. I choose not to go to class. Not immediately. The upright piano that had been crammed into the main hallway years ago was where I sat instead. The finish chipped, and one key became permanently jammed. I didn't play, but I put my fingers to the ivory keys. The corridor buzzed around me as I sat there. The janitor stopped for a second as he pushed his cart by. He nodded as though I belonged there without saying anything or making fun of me. It was plenty to keep me together. Once more, I missed meals later that evening. Nobody questioned why. Callista was occupied with posing for the full-length mirror in the living room while wearing her new ensemble. Dad spent many hours on a conference call. The home reverberated with the sound of him making promises he never kept. The diary, the folded schedule, the flyer with my misspelled name, and the cartoon chicken were all in a heap next to my desk light when I shut the door to my bedroom and opened it. I only typed one line. The sound was eliminated. I will so provide them the quiet they will always remember. I drew a box underneath that, a blank one. Nothing to say, only room. A place that was all mine. I then ripped out the page. I put it carefully next to the lyrics I had written, and I gazed at them both until the tape began to curl at the edges. For a long time, I stood there. Then I grabbed a pen and proceeded stealthily to the school flyer I had previously taken out of my backpack. The alternate sign-up sheet is the one that is taped next to the refrigerator. At the very bottom, I scribbled my name once again. Godsey Caitlin, a cappella. No stage staff, no lighting, no microphone, and no announcement this time. I kept it a secret. Not Mrs. Carver, not my father, not Callista, of course. I didn't require cheers, I didn't require her blessing. A microphone wasn't even necessary. Perhaps just possibly I didn't require permission if they didn't believe I did. Sometime after midnight, the rain started. At first, I hadn't noticed. Only the slight change in the air, the wind's weight pressing up on the glass. But it was hard to ignore the gentle patter of drips hitting the glass as I sat with my legs crossed on my bed. It was the type of rain that caused you to halt, even if it didn't demand attention. My desk lamp illuminated the blanket with a little circle of amber light, like someone humming behind a closed door. In front of me, I also had my old notepad spread out. The pages were mushy, with some corners bowed from being crammed into backpacks too soon, and others dog-eared. There were spots where the ink had bled through. Nearly every inch was covered with lyrics, handwritten phrases, melody lines, and sporadic drawings of stars and treble clefs. My own disorder. However, my mother's handwriting was hidden close to the rear, delicately glued with fading masking tape. Scarborough Fair. Lullaby version for Caitlin's insomnia. I touched the words with my finger. Her letters appeared to have been written while she was standing in the kitchen, preoccupied, since they were tidy, rounded, and somewhat wobbly near the bottom. Wave after wave of the memories returned. I must have been shivering beneath blankets with a 6 fever. I was wrapped in Mom's favorite blue sweatshirt, the one with worn cuffs and no drawstring. From the kitchen, I recall her humming while she stirred soup with one hand, while carrying a tape recorder with the other. She had a rough voice. It was safe and kind, yet she struck the wrong chords. "This one's for when I'm not there, baby girl," she murmured, kneeling next to me that night and slipping the tape inside my pillowcase. I grabbed the old cassette, which was still in its plastic box. I kept it as evidence that something had existed, even if it hardly functioned anymore. I then began humming the same lullaby off-tune gradually, similar to her. Line by line, I let the words find me, not to change the song's lyrics, only to continue it, to complete the task she began. "Will you be attending Scarborough Fair, sage, thyme, parsley, and rosemary? She used to be my genuine love." I put something of my own beneath her lyrics. However, I took the road. She was never able to. Only my hand, and nobody else's. I let out a breath and closed the journal. The rain had increased in intensity, as if it were attempting to remove something. The storm had passed by sunrise, escaping the outer world, gray and wet. In an attempt to stay clear of Callista and her company throughout the day, I strolled stealthily around the home. However, I sensed her presence as I went by the kitchen. My mother, not Callista. She was drinking coffee at the table and gazing up at the lyrics that I had recorded the previous day next to my bed. When she saw me, her face remained the same. Rather, without saying a word, she put her cup down, gently came over and started combing my hair. She would sit still before school, much like I used to do when I was younger. Eventually, she continued. A multitude is not necessary to be heard. Someone who is genuinely listening. There was no apology. It wasn't quite apathy, but it wasn't apathy either. And it was sufficient to prevent me from losing it. There was nothing more from her. She simply gave me a shoulder squeeze before leaving her coffee on the table half full and heading back down the hall. After a little more standing, I packed my suitcase for the rehearsal. I just took the notebook and my mom's old sweatshirt, not the school folder or printed program. The identical one from years ago that night. There was still a little scent of lavender detergent and cinnamon. I put it on beneath my coat. It had the feel of armor, unbreakable but soft. I had no idea what to expect from the rehearsal. I didn't give a damn. I was no longer going into battle. I was entering to recall. Should keep in mind that I was always welcome here without their consent. Should keep in mind that they weren't the beginning or the conclusion of my song. I had nothing to prove here. I came to sing. Singing a song that was already mine didn't require their consent. The fragrance of damp leaves and old bark from the previous night's rain persisted in the air the following morning. I half-zipped my hoodie, Mom's faded blue one, and I pressed my notepad to my breast as if it were a tangible anchor. It was quieter than usual at school, or perhaps I was just thinking about how strangely motionless everything had become. When I arrived early for the dress rehearsal, I could still hear the stage workers tweaking lights and taping down wires. Although I was no longer on any primary lists, I had been penciled in last almost as an afterthought by someone, possibly the student director or someone attempting to be fair. The end would be silent, and I didn't mind. By then, they could have left for home. The assistant stage manager gave me a little wireless microphone while I was waiting backstage. Her eyes darted about and she appeared uneasy. "Perhaps it's misbehaving a bit," she muttered. I gave a nod. Took things slowly. "Regards." She avoided looking at me. There was nothing more I said. Didn't pose inquiries. My purpose was not to plead for functioning. My name was called. Specifically, Caitlin G. The lights went down. Silence. More, actually. There was a stir in the theater. With mic in one hand and my notebook in the other, I took a step forward. Take a breath, then scream. After a powerful blast of feedback, the microphone died. Nothing at all. Static quiet for a beat. I turned my gaze to the tech booth. The AV man shrugged and partially lifted his hands. He did not stand at all. From somewhere close to the third row, there was a hint of laughter. Then, bok, bok, bok. Someone gave a chicken-like cluck. Soft at first, it spread. Waves of derisive laughter crashed hard into my chest, rolling over me like a tsunami. However, I remained still. Not quite yet. The screen behind me then sprang to life. I was the one. I was unaware of the existence of the footage. I had been videotaped in the hallway. I had been humming to myself while sitting on the bleachers a few days prior. No microphone, just singing quietly. With squawking noises and animated chickens pecking the beat, they had looped it over. In sparkling Comic Sans, the words, "Brave chicken coming to a coop near you," flashed. The whole auditorium let forth a roar. I went cold. I avoided eye contact. I didn't recoil. I made my way to the stage's edge, placed the shattered microphone on the floor slowly, carefully, and as delicately as if it were made of glass. Then, without any backup lights or music, I sang. "Will you be attending Scarborough Fair?" Almost unintelligible. My voice faltered. However, it was quite unpolished. No filtering. There was a pause in the laughs. Even the guy next to them was shushed. Then, however, ring. The bell rung. Chairs scraped back as the magic shattered. The audience scattered, chatting loudly and laughing once again. I left the stage as if nothing had occurred. Didn't turn around in the corridor. I was not stopped. Nobody apologized in a whisper, not even quiet. Just not there. I hid in the bathroom. The stall was locked. Examined the mirror. My eyes were steady, but my face was pale. They were looking for a scenario, a breakdown, and a punchline. A performance was what they desired. All right. After taking my notepad out of my backpack, I turned to a blank page. I scribbled in the middle. No need for a spotlight. Just the facts. I once underlined it, but then again, My mother was waiting for me at the kitchen table that evening. Her eyes were worried and I could see it. She opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to speak. "Are you all right?" Instead, she inquired, "Want to talk?" In the doorway, I stood. The hood is still on and the sleeves are wet. "Mom, don't worry," I whispered softly. "I've made up my mind." I spoke without trembling. It didn't get up. Something within had shattered and rebuilt, yet it was still peaceful. They just started the incorrect fire, even if they were unaware of it at the time. It was still dark in the auditorium at 7:30 the next morning. Through the stage doors, the dew-soaked air entered the room. I entered with my notepad, a tattered Walkman, and a burned CD in a small plastic sleeve. Nothing fancy. The sweatshirt I was wearing seemed like armor, a stand-in, a technician setting up despite the tattered cuffs and faint soup stains from when my mother had laughed too loudly while stirring. Stubblebeard, mid-30s. "No bullshit," his name tag read. I strode directly at him. I said, "I don't need a microphone, but I would like a clear sound check." He nodded once and raised an eyebrow. "I understand. The band will be there in 5 minutes. I sent him the CD recording that had no voices and only ambient backdrop. After plugging it in and adjusting a few settings, he hit play. There was a faint gull call, a delicate wind whispering through the speakers, and then the quiet of the piano like faraway water drops dancing on keys. The room was still empty as I took center stage. The lights went down. I started singing, not to perform, not loudly, just to express myself as I wanted to be heard. I spoke without trembling. After I was done, I heard Miles murmur softly behind the booth, "Are you prepared?" That was sufficient. Something else was beginning to move in the library media room far from the stage as I went backstage to collect my belongings. What was the title of the little film that a senior named Lainey, who had been discreetly watching everything all week, clicked to upload "The Real Voice is Silenced"? I was the only one hidden behind a pile of chairs in the raw, unedited film of the hallway that had been taken without Caitlin's knowledge. Humming Scarborough Fair softly. No memes of chickens or agricultural noises. No impacts of clowns. Only me. Real little and unpolished. It spread in an hour. Children observed in the restroom at lunch during homeroom and in between classes. Even though I was unaware of any of this at the time, I could sense it, since the laughing didn't reverberate when I passed the science hall after third period. The stares from the side weren't unkind. In fact, someone stepped aside to let me pass. A boy I didn't know put his hands in his hoodie pocket and gave a little nod. A girl from one of Callista's groups then approached my locker. "I watched the actual video," she added softly. "I apologize for my previous laughter. It was unfair." I blinked. Regards. To listen, I returned the whisper. That was all. Something settled inside of me like a knot that was slowly beginning to untie, but I didn't grin. Word got out. Even my detractors were at a loss for what to do with me, because I was no longer the joke. The playback was me. Callista, too. When we met, she saw that it was around 2:15 outside the cafe. She rested her head on a locker, folded arms. When she wanted to maintain control, she always employed the same sweet gloss in her tone. With a punctuation-like flick of her hair, she murmured, "You should thank me." After all, advertising is still advertising, isn't it? After giving her a long look, I spoke softly. "I learned how to remain still while people go through problems from you." Already satisfied, she grinned. "Calm as steel," I added. "I've learned how to stand higher now." When that grin wavered, I continued to move. I returned to the auditorium after school, not a crowd. Only the remnants of glitter confetti scattered beneath the front row, and the stench of expired programs. I arranged my outfit for the last performance. A plain blue dress. Mom's hoodie is the same shade. Not a single sequin. Not wearing eyeliner. Only me. I opened my notebook after that. I taped it inside the back cover after taking the crumpled program that had Kaylee Goofy scribbled on it. I took a moment to look at it. I'm still not bleeding in my heart. "Thank you," I muttered. I wrote the last verse with your aid. The prank was finished. There would be stillness next. They would always remember. I stood behind the thick velvet curtain with my fingers wrapped around the edges of my lyric notebook and my pulse pounding softly against my ribs. Corners bowed like folded time edges, velvety from usage. The floor beneath me trembled with low whispers from the crowd, who had already begun to fill their places, and the air had a subtle scent of old wood and hairspray. I glimpsed peeks through a little opening in the curtain. Parents crammed onto rows of folding seats, some dressed casually for the weekend, and others still wearing business suits. Near the middle aisle, 2 local reporters sat with notepads on their laps, perhaps searching for a heartwarming story to round up the school year, while a couple of teachers leaned in to scan the program's eyes. In the third row, Mom sat by herself with her hands folded neatly in her lap and her back straight. The white handkerchief Mom had formerly stitched with my name was tucked under her palm, the thread of fading pink, one letter a little off-center. Since Grandma's funeral, she hadn't used it. On the other side, next to the organizing committee for the event, Callista was dressed in a dazzling outfit, her lips shiny, and her hair curled just enough to indicate effort. Before she put away the microphone, when she noticed me observing, she appeared to be the ideal student spokesperson. Too much cologne caused a senior boy to enter the stage and touch the microphone. He started, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's last act." Is there a slight variation, Caitlin Godsey performing alone, not even a backup track, no cues to the spotlight, only her. From the student area came a few soft giggles. Then there was quiet. I moved forward a step, hands tingling, heart steady. Wait for one more step. I was frozen in my tracks by the voice, nor cruel nor derisive. I turned, just not sure. Now Callista stood right at the bottom of the stage. She had a rigid stance. She looked at the organizers and then back at me after clearing her throat. Her hand trembled a little as she reached for the extra microphone. She responded. I signed her up. As a joke, her voice was harsher than normal, devoid of its typical shine. I assumed she would withdraw. I assumed she would never follow through. She glanced at her feet and then up. However, she did. She continued to appear. I was mistaken. As if the auditorium were holding its breath, the air became thicker. No laughing, no gasps, nothing except silence. After a minute, Callista moved away from the stage and I took her place, still holding the notepad center stage. The wind piano music started as soon as I gave the AV technician a nod, soft like an unaltered recollection. I didn't wait for recognition or even applause. I simply shut my eyes. Will you be attending Scarborough Fair? I spoke freely, not attempting to dominate the space. I only wanted to share something that had always been mine, something no one could rename a few lines in or steal for once. I opened my eyes. Nobody was relocated, not even the group of females in the third row who were often scrolling through their phones during assemblies or the restless 7th graders. My mother was holding both hands to her lips. Her eyes glistened. I got to the last line. I didn't speak loudly. It didn't have to. Like dusk, it settled over them. After that, she will be my genuine love. I didn't bow. I failed to wave. I turned to the audience and opened my notebook, exposing the page that had been taped inside the previous week's program flyer. The one that still read Kaylee Goofy's solo vocal despite the writing being smeared. For 3 seconds I held it, not to elaborate, not to be ashamed, to demonstrate. I then decreased it. Nothing at first, just blinking and breathing. My music instructor, Mrs. Carver, suddenly stood up and it became clear. Then a student line. Next, the whole auditorium. They represented me. I wasn't getting pity for once. They weren't tolerating me. They heard me and rose up. I didn't grin, I didn't lose it. I simply moved away from the mic. Even yet, I replied into the silence that I had never required one. I appreciate you really listening to me this time. After then, I left the platform and into my mother's embrace. I did more than simply sing. The stillness they left me in, I rewrote. The following morning seemed oddly silent, the sort of silence that was no longer oppressive. I felt as though the world was allowing me to breathe. So far, I had not talked to anyone. I didn't have to. I noticed something posted to the entrance door on my way to school. An envelope light yellow. No logo, no stamp. Just my name in pencil. Caitlin's handwriting was a little unsteady, and it didn't resemble any of my professors'. I carefully opened it by sliding a finger beneath the flap. It included a little piece of music paper printed in neat block letters, with a fold along the middle and faint staff lines. Just a single sentence. "We appreciate you speaking for the rest of us. I heard you, but you don't know me." Holding it for as little time as possible, I stood on the porch. The words were stronger than anything anyone had spoken to me all year, but the paper felt fragile. The atmosphere at school was different everywhere, not just around me. There were no clucks of sarcasm or gossip in the hall. Instead, it seemed polite, as if people weren't quite ready to treat it like a fad because they were still processing what they had just seen. I walked by the office's student bulletin board. A recent addition, an unposed picture of me was taped to the upper corner. The light behind me, rather than on me, caught the center stage mid-note. A strong marker handwritten caption appeared beneath it. Students chose soloist Caitlin Godsey as the recipient of the Quiet Impact Award. I continued. I didn't snap a photo. I no longer need proof, so I just continued to walk. I saw him halfway down the corridor, the previous week's janitor, the one who stopped as I hummed next to the antique piano. He looked at me this time as I passed by, and put his palm lightly across his chest. Just acknowledgement, no words. My eyes ached for a second, but I nodded slightly and continued. I got a sandwich at the corner cafe by Main Street that afternoon before I left for home. It was one of those locations where the wallpaper hadn't been changed since the 1980s, and it smelled like cinnamon and coffee. As I reached for a napkin, someone at the adjacent booth spoke. "The folk song was sung by you, correct?" I pivoted. An old couple sat next to each other. The woman gave a kind grin. The man had kind, soft blue eyes. I gave a nod. He leaned slightly forward. Made me think of my deceased daughter. That's exactly how she sung. As if the world had forgotten. However she recalled. I was at a loss for words. I simply grinned, felt moved and muttered, "Thank you." I had a buzzing phone that night. Callista was the source. "You're worthy." Not a single emoji. There is no punctuation. I took a screenshot but didn't respond. After that, I removed the topic. Nor with malice, nor even with sorrow. Just tranquility. I had given up attempting to keep her out of my life. I had just finished clearing the way for anyone who was unable to sit quietly while someone else was speaking. I spent that night snuggled up in bed with a new pen and an old notepad. I still had the cassette my mother had recorded on my bedside table. I hadn't played it since that morning, but nevertheless, I scribbled on a blank page that was close to the back. They attempted to bury the voice and put smaller lettering beneath it. However, roots spread far. I didn't feel the need to write an explanation for the first time. All I did was write because I could. I sat up, looked to the wall, and spoke as though I were speaking to someone who most needed it before extinguishing the lamp. They won't always clap. They will occasionally laugh. However, you will be heard when you speak from the bones, clearly, although perhaps not loudly. Because I wasn't broken by what they had done to me, I learned how to echo from it.